Hi guys, this is day 22 of the A2 Economics Division Challenge, and today we're doing economic growth. Before we talk about economic growth, I want to quickly talk about the actual versus potential growth in national output. So, what exactly is potential GDP? Well, potential GDP is the level of GDP which corresponds to the full employment level of output. It is a GDP that is achieved when we are at long run aggregate supply curve. And we say this that when an economy is at the potential GDP, it is at full employment. But when it's below the potential GDP, we say that it is not at full employment. There is unemployment that exists, as some resources are not fully and efficiently employed. But when the economy is at full employment, we actually argue that the potential GDP is equal to the actual GDP or real GDP of an economy. Now, real GDP of an economy can also exceed potential GDP, and the argument that is made is this: that when your actual or real GDP is beyond your potential GDP, that can only be possible in a temporary sort of situation, temporarily, and that happens when there is a business cycle peak. And when the economy comes out of the business cycle peak, we will come out of this kind of actual GDP to go beyond potential GDP. Now, this would all make sense when we make some diagrams to show what do we mean by this. So let's draw some diagrams of actual versus potential GDP, and then let's show how the actual GDP goes up, and what are the ways to achieve the actual growth versus potential growth. Now, being in the LRAS is what we call being at full employment, and we say this that this is if an economy is at LRAS, then the economy basically has an actual GDP which is equal to potential GDP. But let's assume that actual GDP is not equal to potential GDP. What if the equilibrium right now is here? This is my AD naught, and this is my AS naught, and we are at Y1. If we are at Y1 and not at YF, then a rise in AD can actually take us to what we call full employment level. And this rise in AD is what we call increase in our actual growth or increase in our real GDP of an economy. So an increase in the actual percentage increase in an economy in our real GDP is called actual growth. Now, what I'm trying to say is that this actual growth, AD can shift towards the beyond YF as well, but basically this will happen only in the short run for a very small period of time, but not in the long run. In the long run, the economy should be back at YF. That's the notion that we have, because exceeding beyond full employment by making workers work overtime maybe is not something that is possible. So that is what we call a rise in AD. Now, being closer to AD or AD rising towards full employment of YF basically can help us achieve full employment. So we say this, that as long as the economy is moving towards full employment, AD is rising, our resources are fully and efficiently employed, and that's why we are achieving what we call economic growth. So we say this here, that any shift of the AD to the right towards the full employment results in the economy to achieve actual growth, as the economy is using its resources fully and efficiently. Potential growth is the growth in the productive potential of the economy. So what do we mean by potential growth? This is the potential growth basically means if the LRAS is shifting to the right. So if this is my LRAS naught, if LRAS shifts to the right, that is what we call potential growth. So potential growth happens due to what we call improvement in the quality or quantity of factors of production. It means LRA is shifting to the right, or it means the whole PPC is shifting to the right. So the idea goes this: if the PPC is shifting to the right or LRAS is shifting to the right, that's where economy is achieving what we call potential growth. So there is a difference between actual versus potential growth, where potential growth is the growth that happens when there is an improvement in the quality or quantity of factors of production, and actual growth happens when we are using our resources fully and efficiently, which means going towards the PPC, or will be what we call actual growth. Let's now quickly look at what are the advantages of economic growth. Well, first advantage of economic growth is the idea that when there is economic growth, there will be what we call higher level of living standard. This higher standard of living or living standard means that there will be higher national income, which means people can buy more goods and services, and that means that there is going to be higher sort of consumption by a society, which is happening because of higher income that is achieved through economic growth. So the first reason why economic growth is beneficial is the fact that people have a higher standard of living. The second reason why it may be useful for an economy is just that when there is a economic growth, taking place, there will be what we call a rise in AD. If this rise in AD causes a rise in income, then we can argue that this can cause what we call the accelerator effect, which basically says this, that a rise in income can cause investment to go up, and that rise in investment can further lead to a rise in AD, and therefore more economic growth will happen. So the idea goes this, that it's a cycle where a rise in AD can cause GDP to go up via the multiplier, which in turn causes investment to go up via the accelerator theory, and this cycle can help in sustaining economic growth even in the long run. The fourth argument that we also say for economic growth is the idea that economic growth can result in what we call a positive impact on the company profits and business confidence. Companies will be encouraged to invest more because they are finding higher demand and therefore higher output to be consumed in an economy. So from a perspective of inflation versus deflation, some kind of AD rising and therefore mild inflation could actually be good for economy, because that actually bodes or results in consumer confidence to go up. There are also disadvantages of economic growth which we would like to discuss. The first disadvantage of economic growth is the fact that there will be an inflation risk that can happen. We saw this, that a rise in AD can cause the price level to rise. This may not necessarily always be the case, but if that happens, then there will be basically a problem of inflation that can take place, because the AD curve is shifting to the right. So there could be that kind of a demand pull inflation that can happen. And sometimes we saw in an earlier discussion in AS economics about how demand pull inflation can also result in cost push inflation, because when demand AD curve is rising, prices are going up, workers can sort of seek higher wages, and that could also have an impact on cost push inflation. And if this happens, the rise in cost push inflation happens, we're looking at the spiral, wage spiral that happens, where demand pull inflation can cause cost push inflation, which can affect economy, and another demand pull inflation effect could take place. So the idea goes is that there could be inflation that could happen because of economic growth or rapid economic growth. Second reason why a lot of people do not like economic growth is because economic growth has an environmental effect. The fact that we do not look at negative externalities, we do not look at environmental damage when we're looking at fast economic growth, because our goal is to produce the most output. Our goal is to basically increase our GDP. We end up causing what we call using resources which are non-renewable. We end up also causing what we call harming the economy, and that could not be good for the country. the third drawback when it comes to economic growth is the idea that economic growth also causes what we call inequalities of income and wealth. It is seen that countries that have achieved fast economic growth also saw a rise in income equality, as some people became richer while others were not able to take advantage of economic growth because it isn't benefiting everyone equally. There are a lot of theories about, like trickle down effect of how in the future everyone will benefit one way or the other, but that isn't going to happen, at least for a very long time, which means that economic growth can cause what we call incomes to become unequal in a society. Lastly, that could also result in what we call social effect. A lot of people say this, that or a lot of research claim that when we are looking for pursuit of material growth, there could be issues of more greediness, more selfishness, and less caring society. It's true that a rise in income sort of inequality can result in crime rate to go up in an economy. The health indicators also worsen because of this. Now, I missed out one point, which is in terms of advantages, which is basically the fiscal dividend that happens. So what exactly is fiscal dividend? Well, the idea goes this, that if the GDP is going up, Y is rising, then basically unemployment will fall. And this fall in unemployment would mean unemployment benefits, unemployment benefits will fall, which would mean the government can now run into what we call a budget surplus. Why? Because at one point they're spending less because unemployment benefits are going down, so G is going down. At the same time, because incomes are rising, as people are getting more jobs, the tax collection will go up, and that is good news for economy, because T minus G, which is the budget balance, will go in a surplus, which means this extra money can be spent on projects such as more merit goods, more public goods, more investment in infrastructure, and all of that can further result in economic growth in an economy.